Okay, I got interview questions here from Ray Walsh. Researching an article about RFID chips. People have strong privacy concerns about them. Let's see, what are your positives on chipping technology? Are there any negatives? Um, in reading the full content of the email here, um, it, it seems that there might be some misunderstanding about what's possible and what's not possible with chipping. The problem with the definition of the word chipping is that it's up to interpretation, mostly informed by Hollywood movies. Um, Really, an RFID chip implant is only good for identifying something, whether that's a human or um, a piece of clothing on the shelf at Walmart. The pros and cons, the benefits and the risks depend on the context, of course. So the positives are I can basically do without carrying my keys around. I can log into my computer without having to type a password. I can unlock a smart gun that I've programmed to only unlock the trigger if I authenticate with my implant. So there can be a lot of positives if you kind of construct a world around you in order to use that chip to your benefit. So I go in my house, I unlock the door with my implant. I'm not fiddling for keys or trying to punch in a code or anything. I can open my car door, start the car, log in the computer, like all these applications that I've just been able to implement because I've modified the world around me to use the implant as an identification token rather than a key or a card or a password. Um, in the future, like we have a Vivo Key prototype coming out, and that Vivo Key is able to run software, so I can actually load little tiny software applications onto it, and it will actually run that software versus something like a regular RFID chip implant, which just has a serial number and maybe some little data storage area for like NFC data. You can put like your contact details on there if you want, or a pointer to a URL that'll just launch a website or a video or something like that. But the Vivo key is able to actually create crypto keys and have a Bitcoin wallet or encrypt and decrypt data without giving away your private key to a phone or computer. I mean, that kind of next generation device is going to be really important for maintaining and establishing and protecting digital identity in the future. But right now, the negatives I would say are misinformation about what this kind of technology is capable of and what it's not. And like we get a lot of emails. I get a lot of personal emails from people that are having neurological problems. They're having they're hearing voices or they feel like they're being watched or something like that, or they have a paranoid episode. And then they go on Google and search, and people are like, chip implants, they're messing with your mind, that kind of stuff. I mean, just ridiculous stuff. Again, pulled right from like Hollywood movie kind of storylines, and that's just not how these things work. The best way I can approximate it is they work like the chips in your dog and cat, right? It's just an identifier. It can only be scanned at very close range. Um, all that does is give them an ID number. Then they look in the database and then find the owner and call them. You can't locate a pet with it. You can't find a lost pet. They have to be found and brought and scanned. So in very much the same way, that's how this works. And you know, other negative possibilities would be like if you did an install in a back of a dirty van, you might get an infection. If you did it in a piercing shop with one of our professional piercing partners, or at a medical office, a doctor, aseptic procedure, all that, then the risk of infection is almost nothing. Um, it's orders of magnitude safer than a ear piercing, which stays, open wound for days on end. You have to clean and, protect from infection. But this is, in and done, and in a matter of hours, it's dry and scabbed over, and your risk of infection drops to almost nothing. So, um, yeah, the negatives of actually having an implant, there aren't many. I mean, it really depends on, again, a context and how you set it up. If you use an insecure implant, VivoKey is meant to be secure. It's designed as a secure element in the body and all that. But the more traditional RFID implants, NFC type implants, they're not designed for security. So when you use them for getting into your house, in a personal use context, I think that's fine because if somebody were out there, some attacker was out there and they read your serial number off your implant, somehow, they set up some kind of huge antenna and you walk through it or something, um, then they might get a number, but they don't have any context to how to use that number. They don't know you, and so it's useless to them. So again, personal use context is important. But if you start saying, well, I'm going to have a payment implant or something, then it needs to be secure, because if it's not, somebody doesn't need to know who you are to take that payment information and go make payments and access your account and all that. A random attacker can leverage that against you. Or if you're trying to get into a secure facility that somebody else might want to get into, they might find out a way to scan your implant or something and get in. But again, in these contexts, having the implant is not uh, itself a risk. It's, the cards that you would normally carry around are much more susceptible to reading at a longer distance because the antennas are much larger. Those work badges that people stuff in their pocket, or an access key card they put in their wallet, those things can be, sniffed or scanned from feet away. Whereas this is much smaller. It's a tiny little cylinder antenna, and then you have to get very close. I have a very high-powered reader, and I've only been able to get about 8 inches off of that high-powered reader, which is very conspicuous. So the context, everything, the security and privacy issues really depend on context and what technology you're using. VivoKey doesn't have a security issue because it's designed to be secure. It never releases private keys. It does all the cryptography transactions in vivo. Somebody who sneaks up on you, tries to read it, it's going to be kind of worthless to them, because they're not going to be able to get the private keys from the VivoKey that are essential for opening a Bitcoin wallet or decrypting your data, that kind of thing. Um, if you look at what people are saying about the potential negative effects and privacy issues, what it boils down to is being able to be scanned or read or tracked somehow without your consent. And the reality is it's just not going to happen. What might be technically possible, like I could set up a real high-powered reader every 10 feet, every square foot of the earth, and be able to track somebody in real time to find out where they're at. That is technically possible, but it's wholly impractical. The reality is that your cell phone that you use is doing a great job of that already, as are CCTV cameras and face recognition and gait analysis and all these other kinds of systems that already do all this. Even your purchase history, when you buy stuff from a credit card, you're telling like 5 or 6 companies up the chain from processor to bank, you were here at this time and this day, bought this stuff from this store and like spent this much money. It's things that we don't really consider to be negatives because we don't really think about it. But yeah, having the chip, even in those contexts, isn't really a difference in terms of your risk profile or the attack vectors that you might have. It's I would argue to be, in many cases, would be more secure. Okay, next question. Mike Miller, the World Olympians Association chief executive, called for athletes to be chipped to stop them cheating. What is your take on this? Um, I don't think Mike Miller understands what chipping is. I can't imagine in any context or scenario how it would help stop athletes from cheating. I don't know what he's talking about. Is he talking about, does he think that there's some kind of blood monitoring going on or location tracking? Or I really don't know what in his mind, chipping or I don't know what he thinks it means. It just, in terms of the reality of what the products can do today and likely in the future, this doesn't make sense. So um, at the moment, the passive chips can only be read from 6 inches. How long before it can be, power can be delivered over long distances? Is this likely? Could G5 be used in combination with chips in any way? Um, I, I don't think, I mean, even 6 inches is a huge stretch. We're talking like half an inch for most readers and devices. Um, that's why we put them in our hands so that we can actually bring it up to a reader and get a good read. 6 inches would be actually pretty great because then we wouldn't have to be precise. We could just kind of wave our hand at a door and it would open. But as it is now, you have a reader. Let's see if I can get one here. No. Yeah, I mean, like that's a pretty decent one. Yeah, we'll take this here. So, I mean, you look at a reader like this, and you know, you're talking about having to bring your hand like basically right up to it, almost touching it. Basically, you just rub your hand on it. I mean, that's the range we're talking about. 6 inches would be like amazing, right? Because then we could just go, and it would work. And we wouldn't have to be very accurate about it. But right now, I mean, you got to go boom and bring it right there. We are working on some form factors of implantable devices that would give a little bit more range, but even then, like 6 inches is like amazing. Like so, there's a physics problem here of these things work through magnetic coupling, meaning this is generating a magnetic field, and you have to bring the device within that magnetic field for it to be induct power from it and power up and then modulate that field. When you say, when people think like RF or radio frequency or transmitters, they're thinking of electric field transmitters like cell phones and radios and CBs and broadcast TV and all that kind of stuff. Those are emissive EM field devices, and that's not how these work. These work by magnetic field coupling, and that is just a very small area feature of how the physics work. And so, by the very nature of these things being small, um, they're even less able to couple well with these readers and these magnetic fields. So, getting long range and maybe moving over to an emissive field type device like a Bluetooth transponder or something like that, that would require a battery. That would require some kind of power source. And then you're talking about size increase because you have to shove a battery in there. And then you're also talking about a recharge cycle and how long does a battery life have? Like how long would that last? You have to cut it out in 5 years and replace it. So there's some practicality issues there with increasing range like that. Um, Let's look here. How far off are powered chips that can stay in a human? How long will charge last? Be recharged? Well, we just kind of covered that. Um, Essentially, a powered chip, the primary hurdle is power. And so power storage. Like some people are excited about power harvesting, and that is exciting. Pulling energy from blood flow, pulling it from heat, pulling it from kinetics like movement. Um, all of those options so far have shown microwatt power generation. I mean, I even put a solar panel under my skin to do a test of panel's performance under skin, and it was promising, but it's nowhere near. Solar technology is not near enough good enough to be able to power devices directly. So either the power requirements of microprocessors, cryptography, engines, Bluetooth transmitters, all of that stuff that would be packed into something useful and meaningful, GPS receivers, all those things, the power requirements have to go down orders of magnitude in order to power them directly from energy harvesting, or energy harvesting has to be a lot better. And there's a difficulty factor in both those things. Maybe they'll meet in the middle someday, but right now we still need to, any energy harvest needs to be stored, and storing it can be dangerous. So with energy storage, you want something that has high energy density, something that you can put a lot of energy into a very small physical volume or space. Lithium ion is good at that, does high density energy storage, but it's unstable, thermally unstable. So, you see your Samsung Note 7s blowing up, your hoverboards catching fire, those e-cigarette things blowing up in people's pockets. This is because lithium is just a dangerous energy storage medium. But the other aspects of it are enticing, which is high energy density and charge cycle count. You can charge some of these lithium chemistries 500 times, 1,000 times, 2,000 times, and they maintain the ability to keep charge. You look at something like a pacemaker that has a 10-year life with a battery. That's because the pacemaker requires such a small amount of power to shock the heart into beating. It's microwatts of power to urge the heart to do a heartbeat. So, these batteries are very special chemistries. They're meant to run a 10-year stint from manufacture date on at extremely low power outputs. And because the power output is low, it can have those lifespans. But when you're talking about just traditional Bluetooth and regular old processors and doing work, real live work, your energy requirement is much higher. And so you need something that you can either, recharge reliably for at least, I would say, 10 to 30 years is a good approach. Anything less than that, and you have to cut it out and replace it. I mean, it's just for something like an anti-cheating chip or a body monitor, for somebody in the consumer grade side, not a medical need, but something other than a non-medical application, it just doesn't make sense. So energy storage technology has to come up quite a bit before we can get there. Are there any dangers? Is it true that dogs have developed tumors from chips, or is this a myth? It's essentially a myth. And so there was a bunch of hubbub. I mean, I put this thing in my hand in 2005, and since then, there was a lot of media coverage and a lot of hubbub, and a few people found a market by kind of rabble-rousing against RFID in general. And a group of those people kind of seized on these studies, a couple of studies that came out that were mentioning tumor growth around animals, lab animals that they were experimenting on. And the thing about it is, if you just read their little quips about it, it's like, oh my God, the chip implants, the chip implants are used in lab animals quite frequently to track the animal. Like this animal, I'm doing a test on this animal. Let's put that log entry in, identifying animals, tracking their progress throughout the course and life of the experiment. So the experiment in both of these situations, one experiment was working with mice that had been genetically modified to grow tumors. Um, they were studying tumor growth, metastasization, and all this kind of stuff. And so the entry in the study was just simply that they were surprised that there was a normal, not normal, but there was a high number of these animals that had tumor growths in their body already, like all around, but also around this chip, the device that was used to identify them. And that was a kind of a consistent thing. They were surprised to see that because it was unexpected. Um, but in the other study, these animals they were also studying tumor growth, but these animals were given chemicals to induce tumor growth. They weren't genetically modified to do this. They were just given chemicals that created cancerous growths. And in the study, they had a similar finding. There was, a common occurrence of a tumor growing around that device. But if you and so these group of people that were against RFID, they took those examples and said, see, this causes, implants cause tumors, or implants cause cancer, and that the word cause is a very charged and meaningful word in science. It means there's a direct evidentiary based, like you've established a connect, not just a correlation, but a causal link between X and Y, and that just wasn't in the study. It was just BS. And so uh, if you look at how cancer even forms, is typically around cells that have damage, right? The DNA gets damaged in a certain way, and then it starts cancerous growth. There's a whole section of stuff I could talk about there, but essentially, um, where the chip implants are, the chips that are used in lab animals, they have the glass coating, and then they have a porous coating on top of that that's adhered to it. And the reason for that is, in a lot of animals, the scruff, the fascia tissue between skin and muscle is loose. And so if you put it in a dog without this porous coating, it'll just slide around inside the dog, and you'll not know where to scan the dog to find the chip. But this porous coating lets the tissue kind of grow into those pores and lock it in place. It's called an anti-migration coating. So all the lab animal chips, all the pet chips have this. Ours don't, because we want to be able to remove it later and replace it, and our fascia tissue is very dense, so we don't need it. But humans don't need it. But in reality, the lab animals, that porous coating creates a small bit of irritation. It's a small inflammatory response. And if you do any cancer research, inflammation is a major inducer of sarcoma growth. There's even a term for a particular kind of sarcoma growth where it's around an injection site. So if you get a lot of needle pricks, every time you do that, you're inciting a little bit of inflammation there and damaging the tissue. It needs to repair it. And there's a very small percentage of people that have, and animals that have injection site sarcomas, where you put a needle in, and then that damage is just the right kind of damage that the cell goes haywire and starts a sarcoma growth. So essentially, if you're taking animals in a lab study and you're giving them cancer, you're forcing them to get cancer either through genetic modification or through chemical induction, you're going to get cancerous growth anywhere there's a slight bit of inflammation. And where those chips are, there is that inflammation. So if anything, I'd say there's a correlation between chips that have the coating, the anti-migration coating, and massive induction of sarcoma growth through whatever means. But there is no causal link. It's just baloney. So anyway, probably longer than you wanted to hear, but that's what it is. Okay, so yep, that was the last question. So I hope that makes sense to you, and let me know if there's any more questions.